So hopefully before we start, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Francis, and thank you for the opportunity to chat to you tonight. This is kind of like a little bit of a personal journey, but I guess it's what I think. So you can take you what you want of it, but hopefully it's give you some things to think about. One of the things as being chairman of a club, and I guess Francis, may get this, in terms of what else he does, but is, I have people kind of writing in saying, well, I've just got to HF, what do I buy? And, I don't really want to recommend anything because that can be dangerous, but I do say to people, well, let's talk through, what you want to do and why, and then I can suggest one or two things that you might want to go and look at. So this is the kind of that theme tonight, really, in terms of that. So I focused it on buying your first HF transceiver, but it could be for any other transceiver. I do occasionally swap mine over every couple of years, so I do think about these things as well. So really, where do you start? And probably the best place not to start is really deciding that you want one of these things that you've got to actually take a mortgage for. But actually, underneath it all, it is really complex to get the best out of it. And you could probably spend a couple of years squeezing the performance out of this thing, whilst you pay off the mortgage. And that's probably not a good place to start if you're new to HF. And kind of taking that kind of view, really, HF is about, like amateur radio is, completely, you do something and then you kind of learn a bit, and then you do a bit more and you learn a bit more, and then you kind of make a few mistakes and you learn a bit more. And overall, HF is really getting a feel for the bands and the propagation, but also the kit that you've got, really what you want to do it. So really, where do you start? Well, you've got to start somewhere. So I don't know when this picture was taken. I guess it was in the late 70s, so that's how long ago it was. But, I had a thing on the top there, which was the transmitter. I had top band and 80 meters, and I had a commercial receiver underneath it all, which I think was an origin of what was Tandy and Radio Shack and whatever at that time. And those two together, and I got going on HF with 80 and 160 meters. Now the thing at the top, and you may not be familiar with it, some of you, or perhaps all of you, I don't know, maybe too many years ago now, is a thing called the Kodar 88, or the Kodar 80 and 160 meter transceiver. And when you kind of looked at it, that's what you did. So it had a couple of valves in, and it isn't like the HF kind of PAs that we've got these days, where as long as it sees 50 ohms, it kind of it gives you the RF output. You had to tune and load, the antenna, and because it was valve, you tend to have to let the thing and turn it on and then leave it for an hour or two until it actually got stable, and so it sort of it actually had a constant temperature. And you can see that it did two bands. Now, when I bought this, and I will have to move this. Hang on, I've got a bar here. Let's move there. When I bought this was 12 watts out. I used this for a couple of years. It was £16 for the transmitter, and it was £8 for the power supply. So the power supply was under the bench. One of these went on HRD in June 2020. The guy wanted £135 for it. And there was a receiver that went with it, which I did have for a time, which was drifted like crazy. And they also go for about 130 to 150 pounds. So, people say, well, you always lose money on amateur radio equipment. Well, it depends what you buy or how long you hold on to it. But this Kodar stuff is still, I almost bought one for, the kind of nostalgia really of it. But that was important at the time. So, in those days, 16 quid and 8 quid was a lot of money to me, really, on that. And let me just get this right now. So really, in terms of that, let me just see if I can get rid of this because it's being annoying. So, in terms of health warning, I don't have, any predilection to kit, really. I'm sort of manufacturer agnostic. But I've owned quite a lot of rigs over the years, and I currently own JRC, which is probably, again, a nostalgia keep. It was one of the first transceivers I ever bought, and it was miraculous that you didn't have a separate VFO that you had to net onto the receiver. You just actually use the receiver, and there was the transmitter after you. I've got quite a lot of ICOM kit. I like ICOM a lot. I think they've got it right most of the time. I've got some Yaesu kit. Not a great fan, but some Yaesu kit, because some of it worked quite well, I think. And I've recently gone across to Flex, which is beginning to edge towards the mortgage category. But it was the time to think about something else, and for good reasons, I bought the Flex. So I do. I was using the Flex today. I was using the ICOM yesterday. I was using the Yaesu yesterday. So I use that, and they're all good manufacturers producing good quality kit. I think over the years, you kind of work out what you like and what you don't like, and a lot of it is to do with, how well does it work, but do I like using it, and is it easy to use, and can I find things, and do you have a predilection for little knobs or a predilection for menus? And I think some manufacturers have got that right, and some manufacturers have not got that right, really. So depending on what you buy, and sometimes secondhand, you go back a generation or two, it's nearly all knobs, but most of it now is it's menu driven, cat controlled, and that's kind of what you want. But I do cherish the antiques, and in fact, the one at the top, the picture you can see is my cherished antique, and I get it out and have a QS on it, polish it occasionally, and put it back in its Pelican case, and I kind of wait for another 3 months until I use it again. But the audio on it is outstanding, and it's probably one of the best analog type transceivers that there was available, and it had its faults. The power supply in it was the weak spot. It's got a 60-volt power supply, which tended to go FUT. So I had all that rebuilt in there, and it probably cost as much as the rig did actually at the time to actually get all that rebuilt. But it's a really good transceiver, and I do love using it. If I had a choice, I would probably use that most of the time. But one of the downsides, well, it hasn't got cat control, and you need things to, for cat control, and it hasn't got a panoramic display. And I don't know whether any of you are CW operators, but the QS counter is really, really good, and it's got a lovely break-in, and I do like using it for CW. And some of the time, having the panoramic display is no big deal. But some rigs I kind of use for rag chews, so I kind of sit with my feet up sometimes, and some I'm a big contester, so I've got kit that I've honed for contesting, where I can actually tie down how it operates and know how to use it exactly to get those signals out of the noise sometimes in a quick fashion. And some we just sit back, and it's got audio profile that actually makes it very easy to use. So really, it depends what you like and what you kind of use it for. And I'm kind of, I don't have any predilection, but I'm not one of these people that has a fatwa on data modes. It's there, everything's legitimate. So I've done everything from CW to SSB to data modes to satellites to TV. I've done them over the years, and some rigs are good for doing it, and some rigs are less good for doing it. But if you use a mix, then you might want to think about a rig that can do most of those things, really. So let me go again to. So what have I learned over the years? Well, I think you've got to use your money wisely. I mean, all of us, we're not oligarchs. Well, I guess they're not oligarchs anymore, but we're not oligarchs that can almost decide. And there's one person I've met that did have something, I'll come back to that, but that we can decide to have any piece of kit we wanted, really. So, use your money wisely, and you only spend it once. And so therefore, it can be an expensive hobby. It's not the most expensive hobby, but it can be an expensive hobby, and it's do your research. So, talk to people, do your research, go and try it. I'll come back to all that and see whether you actually think it performs well, but moreover, does it actually fit what you want? And do you like using it? And are the ergonomics right, really? And I'll come back to that in a second. But before you ever put the pennies down on a transceiver, think about the antenna. It's probably the bit that people forget. The big shiny thing that you get in the fancy box is great, but actually it's the antenna that makes it work. And if you don't spend enough money on cable, feeder, antenna in the clear, you're probably not getting, the best out of your shack and your rig. And so really on that, I always think that, every time I've sat down to revamp the station, and I think I've got a budget to do it, I kind of think about 10-15% I should spend on the antenna. Just to give you an example, really, I run VHF and UHF, and I do 13 SEMs and 23 SEMs, and the cable begins to get about an inch thick, and you begin to wonder whether, how many meters of this can I actually afford to actually get the power to the antenna. But anyway, it's where the money gets spent a lot of the time, depending on what you want to do. So spend enough money on the antenna before you actually think about actually the rig that you want to buy with it. And probably, a poor rig on a good antenna really will probably make you reasonably happy. But the other way around, it won't. And the best thing to do, people say, what's the best thing to buy? The best thing to buy is the thing you've tried, that you can, you get anecdotal reports, but somebody at the club or somewhere, near to wherever you are, they've got one and you've tried it out. And, you've actually sat with them, to actually try it out. So, for example, that JRC transceiver that I bought years and years and years ago, there was one guy that had it, and I just sat with him for several nights, as he worked stuff and whatever, just looking at it, and I tried it out and whatever. And it was sold on that basis, really. But a good lesson for me, and I don't know whether you're Elecraft fans, I'm not an Elecraft fan actually, is I really, really hate, and the superb performance for something like the K3, but I really dislike the ergonomics and the arrangement for the operation of the K3. I just can't get on with it, and almost made a mistake. One of the last radio clubs, I used to live up near in Durham, and sorry, no, it wasn't Durham. It was Chester. I used to live up near Chester as well, and everybody at the Chester club went through a period over about 3 or 4 months of buying a K3, and I kind of thought, well, perhaps I should too, really, until I actually came to operate it on a field day. And I just could not get on with it. So we operated. I said, well, perhaps it's a one-off. I need to learn it. So I took it home. And at the end of a couple of weeks, the only thing I decided was I was never going to buy one of these things. I just really, really disliked it. So it is what you like, and it may perform really well. But if you can't get on with it, then it's not a great purchase, really, on that. So what are the decisions that you need to make, really? Well, it depends what you do, but if you've got a shack and a base station and stuff and whatever, then you might buy something. But if your majority of your kind of HF is HF and mobile, and even going out stroke P mobile or whatever, then you might want to buy something else. And if you're doing SOTA, then again it might be something else. So, and it depends whether you're a CW man or a contest man, or a general sideband man, really, or whatever you want. And one decision you make is new or used. Well, generally speaking, I think everything is pretty good. And I think it was during that period that manufacturers really realized they had to up their game, and they produced some good kit. And then you've got to decide, did you want a shack in the box so that, if you've got limited space at home or whatever, do I want to make sure it can do VHF and UHF as well? And so, something like the FT991 is a good option for that. And there are others as well, 705, they kind of fit what you want to do, really. Do you want 4 meters? I run 4 meters, largely on contests. So, the rig I bought had to do 6 and 4 really well. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I bought the Yaesu FTDX10, because it could do 4 meters pretty well. And, one person I came up with, he actually had an amateur radio shop, but he never changed bands. He just trained transceivers. So he had 5 transceivers lined up in his shack, and he just used one for one band. But it may be that you may choose that, for some bands, you will use a different transceiver. And I guess I've done that to a degree with the FTDX10. to have a, you know, for different bands to have a different transceiver. And you know, overall, you might want something that's general purpose, but you know, come contesting, you want to make sure that you've got something good for contesting. So, you know, things like, you know, break-in and you know, memories and those sort of things are, you know, quite useful for contesting, and make sure the rig's got that really. So those are things you might want to think about. I think not to do is don't get bamboozled with these fancy adverts. I mean, I get quite irritated with all this really, because everything's shiny, everything's black and everything's shiny really. And actually, and this is probably in my personal opinion, that actually when you actually dig down to what the suppliers actually know about these pieces of kit, it's limited. I mean, they're, you know, to be frank, I think they're cardboard box merchants. They see it, they set it at a price, and they move it on. And actually, what support you get really can be limited. I mean, that isn't a generality, but I think therefore, you know, you've got to do the research. And as I'll come on, one of the reasons I bought my kit from some places is because I really like the technical engineer that you dealt with to actually talk about the kit or have issues with the kit, or they were really good on that, so they were good to deal with, and I'll buy them from them again. I'll come back to that a little bit. So I wouldn't buy off the advert, but I'd do some, it might trigger me to do some research really. And actually, you know, I think if you go into, you know, the major manufacturers, and you go to the major distributors, really, they know their products really well, and can be very helpful. And that's why one of the reasons why I think ICOM excel is that they've put a lot of front on their product range, and I've always been really happy with both any service items or information. And you know, some of us have been fortunate, I know, to go to Friedrichshafen and Dayton and things, but you know, you sense after you've been to all the manufacturers' booths and things that ICOM really do know their product well. I think you should be careful of recondition. There's probably a reason why it's being reconditioned, and some of it is people can't get on with it and they call it B stock and whatever. And I've heard some horrendous stories about B stock where, you know, all it is stuff that's actually been repaired and then come back in new boxes and things. So just be careful of that really. And my experience with one particular rig, I got the first batch in the country of a new rig, and it turned out that it wasn't really ready for launch, and so there were lots and lots of issues. And in fact, I got three items in the first 3 months until I finally got one that worked. And that was, you know, that was a policy in which I think the manufacturer thought that they're going to learn as they earn, so they're going to use me for learning, but also use my money to actually sustain their cash flow. It felt like that a bit, really. I wasn't that impressed with the manufacturer, and it's made me very cautious of that particular brand. And if there's really a kind of silly comment that's made, then be really careful. You know, things like it's the smallest ever made. That might not be a good thing. That might not be a good thing, because really it might be really difficult service or really difficult to get parts, and you probably can't fix it yourself. And it's you know, there's certain flags that go up thinking, well, that sounds okay, but you know, I don't think that's a selling point really on that. And I guess you've always got to remember that, you know, do the guy on the other end of the QSO, does he actually know what you're using? You want to make the QSO, and he makes the QSO, and so therefore, sometimes, you know, some of this is really kudos and flattery that you've got one of the sort of top level rigs, but actually underneath it all, something very, very modest would have actually done the same thing. So I guess it's back to spending your money wisely and knowing what you want it for. You know, if it's the CQ Worldwide Sideband Contest, you want a really good rig. But if you just want to make general QSOs, and you know, when a band comes up, you know, 10 meters today, when I was working 10 meters, you just want to be there so that you can actually make the QSO. So I think through that really, and if you're not somebody chasing really ultimate performance, then there are some good rigs that are easy to use with modest amounts of money that do really, really well. So that's fine. I said do your research. Where do you go? Well, I think just some general points really. I think you see secondhand stuff and it is available, and some of that is good, but anything that's been made as a kit can be dodgy really. And so I've another talk I hear was about kits, but if you see anything from Heathkit and think, oh, that'll be good, is it all depends on how the person who put it together has built it. And there are some good Heathkit stuff. I mean, it was never great design, but it was good design. Be really cautious about buying anything that's got Heathkit. I was given actually something called an HW7, which was a little, I think it was about a 5 watt or 10 watt HF transceiver that had been made as a kit. And I then spent probably about 30 to 40 hours rebuilding the whole thing and making sure that the solder joints were properly made, and actually that all the layout was correct as per the instructions. And it was really poorly made. I didn't have any problem with it because I was given the kit or given the thing. But if you're buying secondhand, be really cautious of anything kits. And there's a fair amount of Heathkit stuff still around. When you see it used, I think the problem is, or it can be, that I would make sure you check it out, and that's difficult to do. But if it's been thrashed, or somebody's been driving it, and the PA has really been thrashed, or it's a linear that's been thrashed, be really careful of that, because it could be an expensive buy. And therefore, one of the conclusions is, well, value on warranty, what you can call back. And if you can get a year's warranty on a second-hand piece of kit, good. Some of the manufacturers, when you buy new now, give you long warranties. And actually, I think some of the time I've had to call on them, but by and large these days, kit's pretty good. It's pretty reliable. But do your research. There's lots of forums, lots of Facebook groups. And go to, I know you guys are online, but go to your local radio club and use those, because there's probably somebody in the club that's got one, if not several people, and you can go and talk to them. You go and try it out with them if necessary. And it comes back to the point I made earlier, that if you're going to a dealer, then get comfortable with the dealer, that you're not just being sold a box, that you actually got a dealer that actually can give you pretty reasonable backup. And so there's one London dealer that I bought Flex from. It's the Flex distributor in the UK, and I find really they don't zip about Flex. And thankfully, the Flex service and Flex customer service is excellent. And so I ended up dealing with Flex directly rather than anything to do with the UK. It was just a shame that there isn't some buffer that stops you going back to Flex and having to wait in a queue for a ticket. But overall, the Flex service was extremely good. And if any of you have used Flex, it is a very different operating experience and architecture to anything you've used before. And it does take some learning. And it's got a great facility, and it's got great performance, but you have to learn what to do. And I frankly found the UK distributor and dealer useless, really, on that. So there we are. Make some considerations of that. There's research books. I don't know if you've seen that RSGB does a rig guide. I've got a couple of these things, and it gives you a profile, not great depth, but it gives you a profile. It also tells you how much you should be paying. So all that can be some old, but you can also check out what forums are saying. eBay, although taken with a pinch of salt, you sometimes see kit that actually is more expensive secondhand than it is new, and you think, well, who would actually buy that? But people do. Ham radio deals is really useful. Ragcom is useful, and your radio club is useful. People chat to you about what they paid and why they paid it, and what they got secondhand. And you know, we're going through that with our club at the moment. We've got a surplus of equipment, and we're trying to sell some of it off, but selling it off to people that, you know, are ready to go on to HF and want some encouragement. And you know, we can do we can make a sale directly to them of some of the club equipment, and lots of clubs have got a surplus of equipment really on that. This is quite interesting and quite useful. If you haven't seen it, eHandNet, find out what other amateurs think. So this is the, you know, the profile for my JLC transceiver, but I use this quite a bit really, and it's not just for transceivers, it's any piece of amateur kit. So I've been messing around with rotator controllers recently and looking at options for that, and this was invaluable to actually get background and thoughts from different amateurs around the world of you know, what people think of the kits, and they're all rated, and you get 5-star ratings and stuff. People give call signs. I've emailed the people sometimes. You can usually find the call sign through qrz.com, and you know, had a long discussion with a couple of them about the kit and why they thought what they're doing, and had it changed now they'd used it and all that sort of stuff. So you know, it's about the research. Don't be anal about it, but you know, you've worked hard for your money. You want to make sure that you actually get value for money really with some of that. Now, some people say, well, aren't there these tables of league performance of transceivers? And you know, Rob Sherwood gives, you know, quite lengthy talks about all this. And there are, you know, you can go to his website and it's really quite valuable. But if you go back to the principle I said before, that, you know, if it's post 2010, you're probably fine really in terms of what you're buying. But you can see here, you know, this is his league table where it's actually rank ordered in terms of certain parameters. And when you think about it, you know, it's receive only is the first thing. The second thing is you're not sure what band, you know, some of it's been generated with. So you need to consider that. And some of it really is hypothetical. I don't know if you've ever seen the Hillbilling. It's about, I don't know, 2/3 of the way down that list, the Hillbilling transceiver. That's a double mortgage, actually. You'd have to mortgage twice for that one. I've seen that in Friedrichshafen, but it's not the sort of thing that most people would get. But you can see near the top, there's the new Yaesu 101, and on the parameters, the flex comes well. But they're all good. They're all good transceivers. You wouldn't notice any difference in terms of performance, in terms of what you would generally do with these transceivers. But it may be some that you can use easier than others for what you like doing. So, you know, there we are. You know, it's got the KX3, the one sorry, that's the K3 actually, but it's got the K3S up there, which is quite high up. It might have great performance, but I couldn't get on with it really. So, you know, it's take this as a guide, but it's only guide to performance. But they're all good. So, anything in the top 20, yeah, should be fine on that. What does Rob Sherwood look at to try and again, it depends on what you want to do, but you know, he looks at the noise floor and he looks at the AGC threshold, and you know, some transceivers, in particular ones that are mixed, you know, SDR and super hets, you know, it depends on where the preamp is and where the attenuation is, and some you've got to use attenuators and some you've got to use preamp. So, you know, understand how that works. You know, sensitivity is not a problem. I think in the last 20 years, sensitivity of receivers is well above a good standard. So, you know, not to be bothered by that. Phase noise from synthesizers is a problem, but again, it all depends whether you've got 5 people on 10 meters and you're even if you've got an amplifier on it and using it, or whether you're nudged up against another station on CQ Worldwide and trying to run a contest. So, you know, a good phase noise performance is probably only suitable for probably the latter rather than the former. And these are other things where, you know, you look for parameters, but by and large, lots of the equipment, you know, does pretty well against these. Phase noise, I think, is the only one that you need to be careful and really. And I think Rob would agree, but you know, it's the only one. Sometimes some of the perhaps less expensive kit from some of the major manufacturers, that it may not be quite as good as you want. But I do think the manufacturers have responded to some of that. So, you know, in terms of Sherwood tables, it is only received performance, but look at it. Superhet's generally at the top of the table still, but, you know, most of them have got sort of SDR type facility with them. One thing just to bear in mind is that with SDRs, depending on the A to D processors, you know, you can get a variety of performance. And I didn't really believe that, but actually several people have told me, I think I've got a good one of these, or I think I've got a bad one of these. There is a tolerance to how those A to D processors actually behave, and you know, you may be a little lucky. So as I guess, you know, the bottom line is try it out first before you ever buy it out. Transmit performance, don't really measure it. I think that's coming. And you know, one of the recent comments from Rob Sherwood is, well, you know, manufacturers have now got to step up in terms of transmit performance. And the thing they're going to do is pre-distortion correction of transmit. So it's more like commercial quality. So the Apache does it, and I think Elecraft and Flex have committed to do it in the next generation, but not yet. So really, it hasn't quite got there. But there are a number of linear amplifiers now that actually have inputs for pre-distortion correction. They're just waiting for the transceivers to catch up. So I think that's coming in terms of transmit. So what does all this mean in real terms, really? Well, again, it depends. If you're a CW operator, that's one thing. If it's sideband operator or data operator, you know, and it was never always like this, but I do really enjoy CW. So how it performs on CW is quite important to me, and yet my contesting is sideband, and for fun I like data. So you know, I'm kind of spread between the two. So make sure you know, make sure you get what's right for you. And if you're a contester, then you know it might well be that you've got to probably look at some of those parameters to get it right for you. But it could be you've got a ham next door, and therefore you want to make sure you've got really good selectivity against whatever they're doing, which can be a problem. But can you really hear the difference on the top 20? No. I mean, it may well be noise floor is the decider that may actually lean you towards one versus the other manufacturer. But by and large, as I said, the top 20 radios at least are all the same, really. You won't notice the difference, I don't think. So one piece of research that was done relatively recently was people looking at value for money, does price by performance, and you can go down there to the 31 really, and you can look at, you know, the performance ratio of price versus performance, what the Sherwood performance index was. So you can see the Flex 6600M is the top of it, and Yaesu 891 is the bottom of it, but they are a bit different in price, really, $3,000 versus $700. And if you have got stuff, you know, in the top half of that, it's going to be pretty good. It's going to be pretty good. And if you're in the second half of that, it might suit you, and it probably be reasonable as well. For example, the Flex 6700, which I use in another role I've got, I find that fine, really, and that is 24 on the list and whatever. So, you know, make of it what you want, but if you're looking for value, then you know there's some stuff in there. You know, an Elecraft K2 is $549 there in terms of the you know, the pricing, and it's about halfway up the table. And if you go to a 7610, it's number 14. But you're paying $3,400. So, you know, you to a degree you get what you pay for, but actually overall, in terms of how you use it, it might be that you can find a, you know, a different sort of balance. And they always put, and I don't know why, because I don't know who's got them these days, they always put the Drake R4C as the kind of benchmark. And it must be the people that were doing this have been around so long, that's what they used to use. So that's where their early perception was. And that, so you can see the Drake 4C is 16 there on that. So really, bottom line, make of it what you will. Sorry, was that a question?
No, I think it was just a bit of background
Somebody's
noise.
talking. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. So the other thing to be aware of, buyer's remorse. You know, you've done all your research, you've got the shiny box, you've pulled the thing out, it's black and shiny, you've turned it on, you've got euphoria, really. And then you realise, oh, this is not quite what I thought. And really, you know, you go through a period in which actually you can be quite disappointed. And I've got to be honest, I was with the Flex. I knew what it potentially could do, and it was really nice and shiny when I got it. But it was a hell of a learning curve, and I still come in some days and switch the icon on, because the icon just switches on and the Flex takes 15 minutes to sort itself out. So, you know, I still do that. But the recovery phase is reading the manual and learning how to operate the rig, and you've got to do that with everything. And then from that, you know, you don't get, you know, buyer's remorse. But there was going to be a period, you know, once you bought it and reality is set in, that you may regret buying it until you learn more. And that's where I think things like good service, performance, having a technician in a distributor that knows the product well, being able to formulate questions sometimes. You know, when I got the Flex, I didn't know what question to ask, to be honest. After 3 months of using it, I had loads of questions to ask, really, and that's really what you want. So I think you know, just be aware of that too. So if it was my first rig, and these are choices now, and you can make judgments on it, but I actually think the Sherwood tables, you know, guide you to perhaps the top 20 and what's available, and you can choose whether you get it secondhand or not. And probably ergonomics, convenience become the most important. Decide what you really want. You know, I really hate one manufacturer because it's got menus on menus on menus that are not intuitive, is my view, and it's a pet hate, and I hate it. Whereas, you know, I find, for example, the touchscreen icons are very easy to use, and they are intuitive, and I find them much easier. Do you need 10 watts? Do you need 100 watts? You know, some of them are 200 watts, but, you know, could you make do with 10 watts if you do a lot of stroke P? Well, yeah, perhaps you could. Or if you do CW, but actually, if you want to be in the shack, having 100 watts for certain times may be important. So, you know, what power output it's had, and also the bands. I talked about 4 meters. But I do think it's desirable. Don't buy anything these days that doesn't have a cat audio USB interface of some sort. And it's the easiest to get going, really. I actually think if you're doing stuff for flexibility, get something with 2 VFOs. And if you can, yeah, there are ways to fudge it and whatever, but get a rig that's got some sort of panoramic display. Because actually, once you get one, you won't want to go back. So you can look at where the stations are, you can look at spatter, you can look at QRM, you can look at key clicks.
Quick question, Phil, if I can. The panoramic display, it's not a term everyone's familiar with. I don't know if you can just expand on that.
Okay, so the panoramic display is if you look at the transceiver on the top there, you can see all the signals. So it's the SDR presentation of the band. So there's a frequency on the x-axis. And then as the waterfall, which is what it's called, progresses, you can see the signals. You can see the signals as a function of time. You can see their frequency. And also from the colors, you can see their intensity. So it's a way of visualizing what the band is doing and where it is. And, you know, you may want to think about, you know, some have got an auto tuner, some haven't. Well, it depends what you're doing. If you've got, you know, SOTA, or you're doing something in the field and you've got, you know, a tuned antenna, you may not need the tuner. You might want to dab it a bit, but you can. Whereas if you just got a long wire and thrown it in some trees or whatever, then you actually do want a good tuner to tune it, particularly if you want to go multi-band. So it depends on what you want, but generally speaking, I would go for a cat interface, 2 VFOs, a panoramic display, and an auto tuner. And the one rig that stands out as being fantastic value for money, and you probably all know this really, is the Icom 7300, and it's difficult to beat. Yeah, it's got some disadvantages, not many, but it's got some disadvantages, and it's one that I think Icom got right. I was in a ham radio outlet in the US. I was working in Washington and went down to Virginia to ham radio outlet, and I was there the day that ICOM launched it. So there were people almost queuing at the door and walking away with handfuls of ICOM kit or whatever, and it was a fantastic seller. And I think it clearly still is. And you know, in terms of value for money, I'm not quite sure the price of it, but I think it's about £1,300 or whatever. It's a cracking piece of kit for the money. But if you can't reach that, then, you know, a very good option is and it's a good place to start, is something like a Yaesu 450. They're not made anymore, but there are lots of them around. And generally speaking, you know, the old adage is a 450 is £450, but you can pick them up now for £350 to £450. And, you know, they're a good solid ring that performs well and doesn't have the panoramic display. You might have to do an IF tap on it, but has got lots of other good attributes as well, and is a really nice rig to operate. So those are good places to start if you're really thinking about an HF rig. So really, one of my conclusions: most radios are pretty good, and all the big three make good products. Importantly, just do your research, and that research is actually sitting down with somebody who's actually got one of them to try it. And buy what suits you. It depends on how you want to operate and what you want to do with it. So talk to as many people as you can about what you're thinking of buying, and if new, make sure you try it out. That's really my best advice. So thanks very much indeed for listening this evening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Phil. So yeah, I'm going to stop recording in a second, just so that the guys who are here can turn on cameras and we can have a little bit of a less formal arena. But for those who are watching afterwards, we do have the radio equipment channel on Discord, and it's a perfect place to ask these kind of questions. So if you do have specific questions, please just post in there. I don't have that level of knowledge, but there are plenty of people around who would be more than happy to give you feedback. So let's just hit stop recording at this point.